web. So Phil,
Yeah.
welcome, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I'm delighted to see so many of my old friends here, and new friends as well. And I hope I won't keep you for long because lunch is promised. In fact, it's already been taken out of the boxes, so I got to talk. So this is an unusual talk presentation. In Innovation Enigma, I've never really done anything on the contradictions of paradoxes yet. And it's a sort of my take on the way that for 15 years, a lot of economic geographers have talked about pipelines and buzz and how the clusters are wonderful because everybody shares information and helps each other and so on and so forth. It's not like that anymore, if it ever was, actually, because of digital tech. What the financial traders call dark pools, other people who deal with the offline sort of internet aspects that people get a lot of kicks out of, talk about as the dark web. And a terminology that's been around much longer than I thought, since the days of lean production, which Kevin and I used to study in Germany and other auto regions. The idea of glass pipelines. Kevin will remember when we used to go in to talk to people about the Japanese, the relationship with German suppliers and Japanese. They'd always talk about, oh yeah, they want open kimono. And glass pipelines was another term that was used that I've only come across more recently. Namely, that, nothing's secret anymore. You open the books, we'll tell you how to make a better product and more efficient product and so on. So I'm going to talk a bit about that and how this is creating new economic spaces in unusual areas, geographically speaking. So I'm starting off, I'm not going to talk about Samsung, even though I could. I've just been there and I know how they got it wrong. I'm not going to share that, but I can talk about it over lunch. But don't buy a Samsung 7. But the story I got was this. It's not such a big story actually, because the phone doesn't burn in your pocket. It's safe in that respect. But it's about Apple and their relationship with Samsung. And I just want to mention there's a very good blog on my LinkedIn thing this morning talking about Apple's new Air Mac, which is thinner and lighter, but there's almost nothing in it. So you have to now buy all the attachments. There's about 30 of these attachments on, with wires on them, which mean that you've got to carry a huge bag with the lights. They've gone completely crazy since poor old Steve Jobs departed. So Apple had always had, and you may remember I wrote a paper in the journal which exploded the Apple, I think it was by then, the 4 or the 5 iPhone, and showed that for the 3, they'd had basically European and American chip producers, but by the 4, they transferred that knowledge to Taiwanese and South Korean ones and some others in Asia. And they seem to go through a cycle of, they have an innovation in a general sense inside a smartphone. They get what they consider to be trusted, high quality, a bit more expensive Western producers of various bits of the chip, CPUs and things like that. And then by the next phase, they'd have this knowledge would have transferred mysteriously. Well, it's through the glass pipelines, of course, to other companies. And then by the 5, they'd gone back to especially American chip designers, some of which are not well known and are located in different places, in Texas and in Oregon, so not so much in Silicon Valley. Whatever. Apple was always, all of these chip companies, all these smartphone companies are extremely dependent on this company ARM, A-R-M, which is in Cambridge, which is the designer of all the chips that are used in mobile phones. And they've just been bought by the Japanese company called SoftBank. Why? Well, ARM is expanding, but it hasn't got enough funding, and to do a deal with the bank means they will have funding. They'll have as much funding as they can use in order to expand and compete with the likes of, and outcompete with the likes of Intel, which is what their ambition is. Now, Apple designed this particular piece for the A9, a 64-bit system, so we're talking chips. Sorry about the boring stuff for a minute, but So Apple designed the arrangement of the chips inside the smartphone, but ARM designed the central processing unit, the CPU. Now, Apple outsourced the design to Samsung and TSMC. TSMC is Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation. So they had a main supplier of this particular tricky piece done by Samsung, and a secondary supplier, the Taiwan company. And now, the Apple strategy in recent years, they've been forced into this to open the kimono, because they had lots of problems with their suppliers, some of whom were workers in some of these, committing suicide. They were suffering from industrial diseases. So they opened up their supply chain to the public. You can see it on the internet, at least the last time I looked, you could. And there were about 190 main suppliers, and even smaller than main suppliers. And this is the Foxconn company, which is, as maybe you know, a main supplier of various kinds of lower order chips for smartphones. Now, they were selling on the Samsung and the other company were selling on what they call clock speed, the enhanced power that the new chips are producing, which are both fast and energy efficient. But such is the name of the game these days that people find out very quickly what's going on, either by hacking or simply having these web bloggers who know what's going on and monitor progress. And one way and another, these benchmarkers, this was the design in question, and the CPU, the ARM one is the lighter colored square in the middle, which is really the computer in the chip. And the whole thing is a system on a chip, a SoC. And I think this was embargoed until 23rd of April. So I don't know how it got this. Must have hacked it into somebody's smartphone. So using an app that since was being pulled from Apple's App Store, customers can tell which of these chips, the one from Taiwan, the one from Samsung, was the best. And they found that the Taiwan one was faster and better than the Samsung one, which is taken as another. When I was talking to people in South Korea recently, they said, yes, it's a problem. We know we've got lots of other problems. They wouldn't talk about them, but they knew about the burning battery problem for obvious reasons. And they had a lower battery life when the Samsung company was producing the same product. And one of the reasons is that they have an in-house supplier called SDI, which I think the S stands for Samsung or semiconductor, and the other one is devices, and I is industry. And my friends talked about Samsung suffering these days from their closed innovation model. So that's really what we're talking about. Apple had opened up, but they got into trouble by dealing with a big supplier who is actually a closed innovation company that doesn't really open itself up to learning, almost even machine learning from the outside world. So Apple issued a statement that the test, first of all, they blamed the monitors, saying the test wasn't representative, and what is really going on in real-world usage, which is reminiscent of the way VW responded to the defeat device, which they'd introduced to the software for the catalytic converters that they were telling lies about to the rest of the world. And now we know there's a list in the last at one point of all the companies that have been doing the same thing. So we now know things that we didn't know before, but it's taking quite a long time, but it's because there's been a shift, there's been a disruption, and an attempt to really monitor, investigate, and learn from these big companies or medium-sized companies that are basically telling lies and getting away with murder in many cases. So claims about knowledge flows in pipelines being opaque, which was the original point, the clusters were open, pipelines were more opaque. It suggests really that the pipelines have become more open. You can see through them, they're made of glass, and at least they're more transparent than they were. So Apple presented its general picture as being transparent, but safe because it had what it called a secure enclave at the heart of every bit of encrypted information, e.g. your password. To divulge password, secure enclave language they use, information to the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, the cops, would transgress the US Constitution Fourth Amendment if Apple was to divulge how to get access to people's password from smartphones. So you will remember this. It was only recently, earlier this year, that there was a standoff between the lawyers representing Apple and the lawyers representing the FBI. And amazingly, an act from 1789 called the Old Writs Act, you'd seldom get American legislation dating to the 1780s. But this was an act that was called up at the time, as well as the Fourth Amendment debate about openness, privacy, secrecy, etc., etc. Now, meanwhile, this is how the real world seems to work. When the lawyers are making money but not making progress, the cracking of the code in this case was being done in an attempt to tackle this innovation Enigma, which is balancing security, so passwords and all the varieties of passwords, on the one hand, with ease of use. The point about a smartphone is you're supposed to be able to easily use it, and it's almost seamless. Apple, in its reporting on this issue, shared the following statistic from their own research, that the average user, that's you and me, with a smartphone, unlock their phones 80 times a day. That's been calculated at some nearly an hour plus, depending on how difficult you make it or it is made for you to use a password. Other reports stated heavier users open their phones upwards of 130 times a day, meaning that the smartphone is becoming not worth using in that respect. If you've got these ancient, actually quite old from the days of Fortran and so on, passwords, which were designed by a guy who's now in his 90s. And he's sometimes called in to talk about it and saying that he doesn't use them anymore. Security, therefore, of that core technology was endangering, and is endangering usability, it was thought, until a company called Cellbrite, which is already, and in fact I think the FBI didn't know this, a contractor on other business, well, Cellbrite was actually cracking the code of that smartphone that belonged to two terrorists who were shot in San Bernardino in California. So on the one hand, you've got the lawyers saying you can't do it, and another lawyer saying we can do it. Meanwhile, there's a company, this company called Cellbrite, which is actually cracking it and getting the FBI off the hook, and in a way Apple off the hook as well. Now their expertise, Cellbrite, was in cybersecurity, which is one of the things I'm going to talk about before we finish. It's called what's known as a mobile forensics firm. It comes from Israel. It was acquired in 2007 by the Japanese Sun Corporation, which thought it would be a handy company to have in its portfolio because they specialized in mahjong gambling. As you may know, in Asia, it's a very popular way of losing money. Now, Cellbrite came out of what's known as the Unit 8200 or 82,000. Their cybersecurity initiative in dealing with this FBI issue was led by an alumnus of the Israeli Defense Forces Unit 82,000 Cyber Warfare Division. So here's a source of knowledge, a source of problem solving, which is also generating businesses, entrepreneurs, using other people's innovative discoveries in mathematics, computer science, and so on. Some people refer to this as an enterprise ecosystem. This is a language that's creeping into innovation systems literature, coming from the entrepreneurship community, who belatedly discovered something that looks a bit like clusters, but I suspect in reality isn't. They're publishing quite a lot of articles on enterprise or entrepreneurial ecosystems. Now this ecosystem, if it is an ecosystem, is incubated from a new advanced technology center in the desert, in the Negev desert, near Beersheba, which is a university town in the Negev desert. And it's composed of ex-army signals intelligence, or SIGINT as they're known, firms and intermediaries, including systems design, computer science, academic mathematicians, and so on, that are setting up companies. There was a book which is probably worth reading if you're interested in this stuff called Startup Nation, Story of Israel's High-Tech Miracle from 2009, showing Israel had more venture capital per person than anywhere in the world, and the largest number of NASDAQ-listed companies, 63. So in 2010, Unit 82,000 spies, if you like, decided formally to offer their expertise to other young Israeli entrepreneurs. And the result was their Entrepreneurship and Innovation Support Program. Interesting to us, I would have thought. A 5-month, high-tech incubator in which Unit 82,000 alumni volunteered to mentor early-stage startups. And 22 of these came out of the system between 2010 and 2013. It's now 3-4 years ago. And those numbers at the bottom tell you something about their contribution to the larger tech community in Israel, which, remember, small country, 6 million people, and is generating 25 billion, a quarter of Israel's total exports, not from cyber, but from high tech in general. Now, this has influenced the UK government, the previous one, Conservative, and the present one. The Israeli Unit 82,000 experience is being used, and in the UK, the smart spies are being recruited from GCHQ, which those Brits amongst you who heard of GCHQ know exactly what they do. They spy. They are spies. Those from abroad may not have heard of it. It's like the National Security Agency of the USA. So we come on to that in a minute. So these spies become entrepreneurs using big data, that's spying on us, intellectual property rights from big data analysis. For example, to conduct cybersecurity activity, that is looking for terrorists and thieves and all that sort of, and dangerous people, baddies, you know, the ones who are wearing the black hats, or waving the black flags, of course. So to further this, and it's even this week, it's been furthered even more, GCHQ set up 11 cyber research centers and 2 virtual research institutes. So GCHQ is funding research in these 11 plus 2 virtual ones. And this week it was announced there's going to be a national cybersecurity research institute for the UK, presumably probably based in GCHQ, which is not far from here, but it's over the border in England and Cheltenham. So this national, in 2014, what has now become a national cybersecurity strategy, had its first success when a new firm was incubated. It was an apps firm doing cryptography, and I think this one was it was designed for firms in public sector to combat cyber attacks from North Korea. And when I was in South Korea last week, they were very interested in this and wanted to know much more than I knew. I was pretending that I knew a lot more than I was share it with them, about how they could get hold of this company. Now, where does this occur? Coming on to the economic geography now. This Turn Age City will be familiar to those of you who read Joel Garrow's book in the 1990s. This is where I found, it's a bit of research that I've done in the presentation, that these edge cities, a few of them are where you find cybersecurity, so-called ecosystems. And the names of these places won't be familiar to you. Reston, McLean, Herndon, in Fairfax County on the border of North Virginia and Washington, D.C. A strong focus on what's known as narrow, that's defense and forensics and that kind of cybersecurity. And McLean, you won't be surprised to hear, hosts the Langley headquarters of the CIA, which also happens to be the most luxurious residential location in the Washington metropolitan area. So altogether, nearby the Dulles Technology Corridor, which goes from the city to the airport, there are some 38 cybersecurity firms using essentially GCHQ type data, or in the American case, NSA type big data, about double what they have in Israel, but for an obviously much larger country. And then I found another 11 cybersecurity firms on the other side of the border in Maryland, Bethesda, Rockville. So you've got about 50 cybersecurity firms making a market, as it were, as relatively small and young startup companies. But the so-called 800-pound gorilla of this cybersecurity world is in Silicon Valley. And that big regional innovation systems, sometimes it's called. There are 125 such companies. So it's kind of interesting that the raw material resource is used for cybersecurity, e.g. The NSA and the CIA, generates a relatively large, medium-sized number of cybersecurity, but the place where the talent is, namely Silicon Valley, has 125 or thereabouts such companies, even though there isn't as much activity going on. There is big data activity, usually with Google companies of the like, Facebook and so on. But they are also doing cybersecurity work of the same kind that is being done in near Washington and elsewhere. The other competitor area, apart from Washington and Silicon Valley, is Massachusetts, but it's a relatively small number of firms. In Europe, about 20 are concentrated in London and the technology corridor to the west, as far as Malvern, which is again not far from here, quite close to Cheltenham, and is a SIGINT centre. It's traditionally been a signals intelligence research facility, was public, now private. And I did some research more recently on Cambridge, and there are quite a few small, smart startup cybersecurity firms in Cambridge. One of which, called Darktrace, I was discussing with David Wolf earlier, has done the disruptive thing, technologically speaking, of not just carrying on further and further and further with a linear model approach using a computer as its model of how to develop deep learning or whatever they're doing, but in modeling itself on the autoimmune system of life sciences, so that the autoimmune system and how it deals with diseases is how this Darktrace model works regarding how it identifies the targets, just like antigens and antibodies do in the body. And that's an independent company, but another one called Resilient Systems was recently bought by IBM. So I talked a bit about, how am I doing time-wise? Who's in charge? Do we have a global controller?
No, but I'm chairing. I've got 10 minutes now.
10 minutes, fine. So, entrepreneurial systems, what are they? Ecosystems versus innovation systems. This isn't quite the answer, but that comes a bit later. From the entrepreneurship discovery, relatively recently made an best review is by Eric Stam, a friend of many of you who know him from the Netherlands. He's got a good article in European Planning Studies about this. The entrepreneurship community has discovered proximity, and they think that it promises great steps forward for innovation systems and entrepreneurial ecosystems, so they're sort of jumping on our bandwagon, you could say. We show below, though, that entrepreneurial ecosystems differ from innovation systems, and the slides show some of these in terms of key motivations, research timelines, and results. To advertise it before I get there, entrepreneurship is pretty profit-driven. Without profits, entrepreneurs can't survive. Whereas innovation can survive without profits, and often does. And indeed, social innovation is not necessarily profit-driven at all. It's also on entrepreneurial ecosystems, which are groups of firms, usually presented as though they are a group supporting a particular big firm, a medium-sized firm, in a particular industry. The best one would Annabelle Gower's book about Intel talks about it having an ecosystem of many suppliers, but they're all supplying Intel on fairly narrow, specialized requirements. They tend, therefore, to be imitated rather than innovation systems, which are more motivated by innovation, for obvious reasons. So we keep these in mind. We've got these sort of fairly narrow ecosystems of entrepreneurs in this fairly, actually, probably not heavy social capital sharing, knowledge, information systems, but actually quite competitive and very focused on what they're doing. Whereas innovation systems are tending, I would say, to be a bit more like university open science traditions in their way of functioning. Here, so I can jump that, I've just done that. Now, I've moved now from cybersecurity, which I've said, we now find it has, I don't know whether you call it a cluster, because it's got quite a lot of large firms and some small new cybersecurity firms occurring out in the desert. So this is development in a place that never had any serious development before, so it's obviously possible to do it. The decisions are made by the military, the money is found by the state, and advanced technology campus is located in the desert. This one is much more private, and although it is extremely heavily influenced by regulatory models that are applied in the financial services industry. And this is referring to another desert, some people would consider it New Jersey compared to, say, New York City. And this, their subject of the little vignette I'm giving you here, is what they call financial ecosystems, a platform of exchanges, alternative trading systems, brokerage firms, market data vendors, clearinghouses, all co-located, but not co-located in Wall Street, co-located in the data centers, where the big data is coming through for the trades. So they've also got some resilience, if you like, so floods, hurricanes, and blizzards can be protected against by having a second data center backup. Now, New Jersey has become the center for a particular kind of this trading, which is now accounting for probably by now, my data's a couple of years old, so it's probably over 60%. The New Jersey area has attracted the financial high-frequency traders from New York into itself. And it's considered, but when you look at how it operates, it probably isn't an ecosystem. They call it the financial ecosystem. What happens, and where the criticism that is aimed at this phenomenon is that the algorithms, here we are in this language, sort of AI type language, of the algorithms that are used in order to do the trades when a big pension fund, if you like, is buying 1 million shares from Apple or something like that. The process is actually going on in such a way that you can't really understand how it's functioning. Nobody can, that's the point. It's AI, it's computers, it's faster, as we used to say in the days of IBM, than the human brain. The algorithms prey upon institutional investors' executions. I was talking to David about this. If David puts an order for 1 million, and I'm the broker, the HFT can know what I'm going to do after I press the button, but before the message has been reached and reached its target. Understand? And in the process, they shave off a penny from each that million plus or millions of dollars of each trade. And this is considered by many to be a moral hazard situation. And why this can happen is because of these phenomena called dark pools. And the dark pools are information holes, black holes, which are controlled by the banks, the top nine or so banks in Wall Street, who allow access to these traders to come in and do their worst. But they can't really be observed because it's a so-called dark pool, running off the dark web. And the summary in one book says HFT ecosystems trade in any style that looks like it might make some money, which is a pretty good, accurate description of what they do. And this is how it looks. I drew a map. It shows I was once a geographer. And there's New York City in the bottom right-hand corner, but all these numbers in these places we've never heard of, like Marwa and Weehawken and such like, Piscataway, they all have big data centers in them. And unbelievably, although you may have, if you've read any of Michael Lewis's stuff earlier, you may have understood that these high-frequency traders, they don't want to be in Wall Street. They want to be near and preferably inside the data centers because they get a milliseconds advantage from being located, even being located next to the servers. The heat of the servers coming, they've got the best location. This is, proximity to the nth degree. And all of these numbers add up to the data center, whatever it is, phenomenon complex. And one part of it is even labeled for, marketing purposes, the NJ Donuts, the data center hub, with a bunch of these, which include the NASDAQ exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, and of course, it's so deregulated now. There are about 16 different stock exchanges, all trading more or less in the same business, and competing and looking to shave pennies off and create, entrepreneurs. Now, the final stage of this development has been the recent last 2 or 3 years opening of the world's fastest and straightest fiber optic cable from Chicago to New York for the futures trading process. And this is the one that shocked everybody because this is the one that enabled anybody's trades in the futures business to be anticipated and for money to be made through the dark web and through the dark pool. So there we have this, again, very focused, very competitive, therefore non-sharing type of ecosystem, people trying to outcompete each other to get as much for nothing, really. thieving, many people would call it, from the structured financial trading business. This is summary of that, and one of these is being built as we talk. At least the planning stage has been gone through to, not in this case as with the Chicago, New York, to put it underground, but to put it in cable across the channel so that London and Frankfurt can have the same facility for ripping each other off, basically. So again, I'm summarizing the entrepreneurial, which in my sort of rather critical viewpoint is a bit questionable in terms of its relationship to innovation. Although innovation lies at the back of it, and I'm contrasting with the innovation view, if you like, which I think is better, but I'm not in the entrepreneurship business. So the dark web and the dark pools are, to summarize, encrypted, secretive, and exclusive communities of practice. Now, as I say this, I'm conscious that many people may feel unhappy about this. I'm being critical of what a lot of people earn their incomes from, namely promoting entrepreneurship. Even, you could argue, promoting innovation, saying what a benign and a good thing it is. I'm trying to open people's eyes to the fact that a great deal of entrepreneurship and even some innovation is rather nasty, rather dirty, and not very admirable at all. And I think this is a problem that a lot of our concepts have. I think resilience falls into this category of us wanting to believe that the economy is going to bounce back. And as I look through the window and I look at the old coal mining valleys of South Wales, or the Mezzogiorno, or East Germany, or Detroit, I say, resilience? Where's the resilience? There isn't any resilience. And maybe this is the emperor's clothes have fallen away once again. Just like a lot of our cluster and other, I won't mention smart specialization concepts that have been slung around. So, the dark web and dark pools are these encrypted, secretive, and exclusive communities of entrepreneurial practice, while the distant networks run through hackable and ever more transparent glass pipelines. Innovation can be outside the market, it's social innovation, some of you study it, and it's usually got a benign, but you can probably find not so benign aspects in it. Entrepreneurs and enterprises mainly imitative and single purpose, profit maximization. Innovators discover, sometimes with social purpose, social innovation or applications with swarming potential, sometimes including things like cybersecurity, which have ultimately, I suppose, a benign intention to identify and arrest and do other things which terrorists, for example, and thieves. That can be placed in a category which is slightly higher status, maybe, than the high-frequency trading, which is purely, as I say, about stealing people's money. Thank you very much.
We've now got some time before lunch for comments and questions. And the provocative thesis that far from being a wholly benign phenomenon, innovation can be dirty and dangerous and nasty even. And Bjorn, we're going to kick off.
Yeah, I just want to thank you very much for